Okay, there's a din in Shulchan Aruch that before the Yom Tov of Pesach, and for that matter before every Yom Tov, there's an obligation to study the laws. And it could actually be sometimes difficult because same laws again, right? Even though we all know that there's a lot we could continue learning, but it's difficult. I think we have a wonderful opportunity in the new context of what we've been doing over the past few Yom Tovim. We have a great way of tapping into this resource by looking back at some of the Haggadah manuscripts and looking at how they portray law and custom and then contrasting it with what we do today. So we're kind of going to start at the beginning with the preparing of matzah, and then we'll move to B'dikas Chametz, and then we'll kind of go through the steps of the Seder and point out the different things that are worthy of mention. So,
can I just interview for a second?
You may.
Your cheers on the platforms every time you move the moves with you. I don't know if it's too mercy.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we begin with the following title page that I showed you last week of a printed Haggadah. This Haggadah was printed in Venice in 3 languages in the year 1609. And our focus tonight is going to be on the lower image on the bottom, the image on the bottom, and the image on the top. Because what you have in these 2 images is the making and preparing of matzah. And on the bottom is a typical matzah bakery scene where they're rolling out the dough and they're placing it in the oven. We're not going to focus so much on that. Our concern is going to be more with the image on the top that's surrounded with the pasuk, Ushmartem es hamatzos. And that is the source by which we learn that matzahs need extra protection. And the extra protection is the source, and the word Ushmartem es hamatzos is the source for the idea of matzah shmura, where we're protecting it and we're guarding it. So let's take a closer look at this image to notice what is here and what is not here. So all the way off on the left, you're able to see there's a group of people sitting in front of a little house, and that house has a big wheel in the background, and that's because this is a water mill. In those days, the normal way to grind flour or to create flour from wheat was by putting it through a water mill, and that wheel. You would run water through that wheel, which would turn another wheel and another wheel and another wheel, and eventually would turn the stones that would rub against the grain. And then to the right, you have people who are dealing with this flour. Now they're sifting it in order to get their finer flour. So that's wonderful and that's great. Why is this part of the scene? Why is it not just the matzah baking? The reason this is part of the scene, not just the matzah baking, is because this is also a ritual aspect. What do I mean by that? Well, that's what the concept of shmura is. The holy part of preparing matzah isn't only in mixing the water into the flour and sticking it into the oven. Shmura means that it's guarded. And guarding means from the earlier stages in the production. And so you don't just go to the supermarket and buy flour. You actually have specially made flour. And so therefore it's no surprise that what we have over here is an earlier part of the process. But once this becomes a logic, you need to ask yourself the following question, and that is, but isn't there a stage that's earlier? What do I mean by that? Well, if you remember as a child, if you watched the video, Let's Bake Matzah, the process doesn't start with the grinding and sifting of the flour. The process of shmura begins out at the field, where once they harvest the wheat, they are guarding it and making sure that it doesn't come into any contact with water. So it's interesting that the scene picks up right here without having that earlier depiction. We'll come back to that in a minute, but I want to show you that this is not just happenstance. I'll show you another example. What you're looking at over here, and now we're going to move to the manuscripts and to the art, is a Haggadah that's called the Yehuda Haggadah because the person who owned it for a while, his last name was Yehuda. Today it's at the Israel Museum in Eretz Yisrael. And this is a very interesting Haggadah because there's a lot of images, and what's special about it is that they have captions. And we're going to take tonight a look at some of those captions. And on this spread here, which is the first spread in the Haggadah, what you have is the process of preparing the matzah. The left-hand page is within the bakery. I know it's not so clear, but on the top left, you may be able to see someone sticking some matzah into the oven. Behind that person or people, there is the table where they seem to be rolling out the dough, and some of the other processes of preparing the matzah are present on the left-hand page on the bottom. But what you have on the right-hand page is the earlier stages. And again, that earlier stage, what's the first stage on the top right? The first stage on the top right is the watermill. And here you have a closer up of the watermill, and the caption actually says like this. They're written in rhymes. Habal im avdoi hoya ktata al shema acher lahavi achita. So the master is having a fight with his slave because he was late in delivering the wheat. So in other words, he tasked the person here with the horse or donkey with bringing the wheat, and he shows up late, and you don't own the mill, you're renting the mill, so every minute counts. And this is the beginning. So obviously the author is putting here, the artist is putting here some feeling of lightheartedness and comedy, which he does throughout the entirety of this Haggadah, and I'll show you a few more examples shortly. But again, what's the beginning of the process? The beginning of the process, the ritual aspect begins with the watermill, with the grinding of the matzah. So when you have 2 times with the grinding of the flour. So at 2 times it's no longer an accident, and now we need to ask ourselves what's happening over here. And the answer is not too difficult to come by, because if you go back to the Torah, he writes that there are 2 different traditions about what does matzah shmura mean. We know that we need to guard the matzah, but when does the guarding begin? So first he brings from the Rif, Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi, who says shetzarich lishmor chitin sheyotzim b'yedei matzah, the matzah that you're using for the mitzvah has to be mishas katsira, from the time of the harvest. Shelo yovay alei amayim. This is the minhag and the tradition that we follow today. However, the Tur, he's Rabbi Yaakov, the son of the Rosh, quotes his father and says that his father wrote, she'ein tzarich ela mishas tchina, you only need to guard the grain from the time of the grinding. And he quotes his father. Noya bin ba'ashkenaz uvitzarfas, France and Germany. The Yehuda Haggadah comes from Germany. L'shoimra mishas tchina, from the time of grinding. Why? L'fisha oz mekarven oisam el hamayim. That's when they get close to water. In what way? Shatoichanim berechayim shalmayim, because they're being ground at a watermill. And you come to a watermill, there's water splashing all over the place. So that's where we want to be really careful that there isn't water coming unnecessarily in contact with the flour. But before it comes to the watermill, this is not a necessity. And so in that sense, we learn something about Shmura Matzah, and we should be proud of the fact that we do it in a way that's a real Hiddur mitzvah, and in that way it's probably a little better than the way it was in some communities in prior generations. So what's interesting is you look at an image, and this is going to be the big question that we're going to be revisiting again and again tonight. You look at an image, is it random, is it meaningful? And sometimes the answer is it's random. Don't pay too much attention to it. But sometimes the answer is it is meaningful, and it often takes work and scholarship to kind of figure out which one falls into which category. Now, if you go back to that spread that I showed you earlier, right under the image of the watermill, you have this image that you can see on the screen right now. And the caption for the right image says, the scholars are discussing or debating with one another whether to draw water from the following well. So, and there's a big tower there, and that's probably a European city where people who would congregate and would draw water from this well. On the left, they're bringing the water to the bakery. So I was thinking to myself, is this a joke? What degree is there? What is there to debate and to argue and to be mafalpal about drawing water from a well? Well, the truth is, you could have these types of debates. I'll summarize here from the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, who's quoting sources earlier from these periods and from earlier in Ashkenaz, who he has a whole discussion in this sif of where is it better to take water from that you're going to mix into your matzah. Is it better to take it from a well that's in the city, or is it better to take it from the river? And he says, well, sometimes it's better to... What's the question? The question is, you want to have water that's as cold as possible. You don't want water that's warmer, because then maybe the process of chametz would kick in quicker. And so he has a discussion here. He says, well, on certain circumstances it's better to take from rivers. Certain circumstances is better to take from wells. The main operating, controlling principle is where you're going to get water that's the coldest as possible. And he throws in a line, and we do everything we could to get the coldest water as possible. And so therefore, I don't think that image is wholly a joke. I think there's some truth to that. Should we take from the river? Should we take from the Mayan? There are sources in supporting each one. And within, you can get into that type of discussion of, is this the best type of water that we should be drawing? And again, the Alter Rebbe is quoting from sources earlier from him in Ashkenaz who are concerned with this thing. Okay, we're going to move right along. We baked our matzah, it's all ready to go, and we're going to have it for our Seder, and now we need to do bedikas chametz. Or at least we prepared the flour and water for our matzah. Maybe we're going to bake it on Erev Pesach, but now we're going to need to do bedikas chametz. And so I present to you here a spread from the Ashkenazi Haggadah. I showed this to you in the previous class, and there you have the page of bedikas chametz, and the brachas on the right side, and on the left side there's the process of making an eruv in addition to kol chamira. The image on the left hand side is the exchange of a matzah, what has to do with the eruv, which is not going to be our attention tonight. We're going to zoom in on the bedikas chametz picture. So here you have an individual who's checking some sort of fancy cabinet. He seems to be holding in his hand feathers. He does not have a candle, though it's clear in the Gemara and the Mishnah that you need to do bedikas chametz with a candle. You can presume that someone else nearby is holding the candle for him. What's in his left hand? You know, in the left hand is a bowl, but that bowl is a very odd shape. I couldn't get it sharper going in closer. I hope you're able to tell that bowl is not a traditional regular plate. It looks like a half of a bowl. It looks like a piece of watermelon. It looks like the bottom of a watermelon. So some have looked at this and said that this is a broken keli. And now the question would become, why are you doing bedikas chametz with a broken keli? As far as we can tell, this is the only image that has a broken keli. Well, it turns out that there's good reason for it. There's a discussion in the Maharil, who's the great Pesach in Ashkenaz in the 1400s, and he has the following discussion. He writes like this: when chametz shamatza b'bdika, when you find the chametz, yishmar ad lamachar levarei, wait for tomorrow to burn it. We do not burn it that night. V'lo yavar b'layla. Why not? Why can't you just burn it that night? Mishum shesarech lavat lo yishenis lamachar. Because I need you to do bittul chametz on the next day. Why do I need you to do bittul chametz the next day? Why can't you just do bittul chametz the night right after B'dika? Very simple, because you're planning on eating chametz tomorrow for breakfast, so you can't be mavatal that. So what happens if from your breakfast, which you were mavatal, a piece remains? You have a problem. So that's why we do another bittul. We do another bittul by day. After you finished eating, we do another bittul. And I need you to do that bittul tomorrow. I'm afraid you're going to forget, but we know action. If you have to burn your chametz tomorrow, then you'll do the bittul b'shas habir. So he says, therefore, don't burn your chametz tonight, do it tomorrow. Umahai taima amar mahari segal, that's the maharil. This is the reason why we do the 10 pieces of bread. Why do we do the 10 pieces of bread? Do your b'dikas chametz, check for your chametz, you find, you didn't, you did your mitzvah, right? So there are sources that say maybe we're choshesh that it says bracha levatala if you don't find, but really? Is it really a bracha levatala if you don't find? The mitzvah is to check. So the earliest source is the reason you're putting down the 10 pieces of bread is because I need you to burn your chametz tomorrow. Why do I need you to burn your chametz tomorrow? Because I need you to do bittul tomorrow, and I'm afraid you're going to forget. Bittul's an easy thing to forget. But if you need to show up for bir chametz, and I know what you're going to do. So this is the reason for putting down the pieces. Then he goes along and says, it seems to me that at the very least, meaning if you're not putting down 10 pieces of bread, so then at the very least, burn the keli. You set out to do b'dikas chametz to the keli. Tomorrow morning, you'll burn the keli, even if you didn't find any chametz. Kedei liskar beer, and that will remind you about the beer. Im lamata sham chametz b'bdika, if you didn't find any chametz b'bdika. So what happened over here? Basically, there was an issue. The issue was we need every Jew to do beer chametz on the morning of Erev Pesach, for the reason because we need every Jew to do bittul that morning. Because we want everyone to do bir chametz, so there were two potential minhagim that started developing sometime in the 1400s. One was put out bread. I don't want to put out bread. Okay, burn the keli. Which one won the day? The one that putting out the bread, that's the one that won the day. And that's what Jews today do. Burn the keli didn't win the day, and there's very few sources that talk about it. There's one or two other sources that talk about it in his generation. After that, people stopped talking about it, people weren't interested. So, Rabbi Daniel Sperber, in his essay on this, has wondered maybe this is why you have the broken keli. In other words, if you know that you're going to be burning it the next day, so then, use something that, if it breaks, in Chodesh Tammuz, hold it for Pesach. We're going to use it for B'dikas Chametz, and then we're going, and we'll be able to burn it then. Possibly, it's an interesting theory, definitely worth of consideration.
Maybe why we burn the spoon.
They don't discuss the spoon in these sources. The spoon isn't discussed in these sources. We have to trace the spoon. Menachem.
Regardless, it makes sense to have a broken keli because for them, they're using the kelim for Pesach and not, and so for chametz, they rather use something that.
Saying they anyway would want to burn it even without this minhag. What's interesting is that there are a lot of b'dikas chametz pictures, and this is the only one with a broken keli. But yeah, that's an interesting thought. Yeah. What was that?
Why are we taking these pictures?
Yeah, so that's going to be the underlying question for each one of these things. It's underlying. 50% chance it's random and it's an accident. 50% chance that there's meaning here, and that's for you to decide. I'm not here to impose one particular. My job is to bring it to your consideration, and you will be the one to make a determination whether there's halachic significance to it. Clearly, sometimes there are. And sometimes there aren't. I'm not here to put which one goes into which box is an interesting conversation to have. Okay, we are going to move along. Last week, I showed you this picture, but we didn't really spend much time talking about it. This comes from the Golden Haggadah. In the Golden Haggadah, there's an image leading in to Pesach, leading into the observance of Pesach, and it has the following caption: Bala Bayis mitzaveh laseis matzis v'charoises letinoikes. You have the Bala Bayis, the master of the home, presumably the person for which this Haggadah was made, is commanding, right? He's sitting on his very fancy chair. He's not doing anything. He's just commanding that matzahs and charoises should be given to children. And there's a lady over there holding a baby with a number of children over there, and they're being given matzah and charoises. But pashtus, this is the minhag of mois chitim, of a wealthy person who's distributing things for Pesach. Why dafke children? I don't know. It's not the only image of this sort. There's another one in the Sarajevo Haggadah. I just couldn't get one that was a high definition image to be able to show you, but a very similar image over there. And what's interesting is there too there's a caption. And the caption says, matzahs and charoises. And that's what I want to focus on, because that caught me off guard. Why charoises? You have matzah, wine, maror. Like charoises is like, relatively speaking, a marginal thing at the Seder. We have a little bit of it. And why is that being portrayed here? And again, you have that in two different occasions. So we looked at the Abudraham. And the Abudraham is written in Spain during this period of time. And he discusses the Halachah and Minhag. And in Halachah and Minhag, there's a problem, because we say, Kol dichvin yeseh v'yechel, whoever is hungry, come and eat. Kol ditzrich, whoever needs, yeseh v'yisach, come and celebrate Pesach. Well, that sounds like a double language. Why do we need to have both of those? So Abudraham explains. Kol dichvin yeseh v'yechel is whoever needs food, if you're starving, if you're hungry, pasha, breakfast, lunch, supper, come. Kol ditzrich yeseh v'yisach is something else. Pirush, she'efshe sheyesh l'adam pas oiros u'pas doichan ve'enei rav. Maybe you have food, you're not hungry. Yesh lo ma'al yechal. But ein loy matzos mitzvah v'tzorchei Pesach. He doesn't have matzah and tzorchei Pesach. Now, Abudraham, writing in the 1300s in Spain, is going to list what the tzorchei Pesach are in addition to matzah. Kegoin, charoises, umaror, v'yayin la'arba koises. This is very interesting. Charoises is before mar and before wine. I would have thought matzah, wine, right? And then you can have a discussion about the other things. But it's not that way. I think we need to connect. I didn't see other people commenting about this. I think we need to connect this Abudraham to those two images. The charoises played a larger role, was more of a significant thing then than it was today. And one second, Levi, we see this already in Rambam. If you look at Rambam, remember Rambam comes from Spain. When he describes the Seder, look what he writes. For karpas, he writes, you dip it in, charoises. Umetabel matzah, b'charoises. The matzah goes in the charoises. Metabel mar, b'charoises. Koirech matzah mar, b'charoises. We use charoises twice. He used charoises 4 times. Karpas is in charoises. Matzah is in charoises. Charoises is all over the place. And then if you consider the fact that there's a complicated recipe involved, maybe fruits out of season, I don't know. It's something to explore and to think about. Charoises was the next thing after matzah for mois chitim. It's not the way we do it today, but it seems that in Sfarad in the 1300s this was the case. Okay, so that's in terms of the mois chitim. Now let's come to the evening of the actual Seder. I'm showing you here a page from what's known as the sister Haggadah. It's called the sister Haggadah because there's a Haggadah called the golden Haggadah, and this is very similar to that Haggadah, so they call it the sister Haggadah. Anyway, on the left-hand side, you have a family clearly celebrating the Seder, and on the right-hand side, you have something else, and we need to talk about that something else. The caption reads as follows: Bala bayis ubnei beisai sha'imrim ha'Haggadah. Okay, that line in itself is fine. But the problem here is, we say the Haggadah, we're around the Seder table. The left-hand page says, Bala bayis ubnei beisai sha'osim ha'Seder b'leil Pesach. Two things are happening here. One is the master and his family saying the Haggadah, and the other is doing the Seder and Leil Pesach. So, of course, right away, you think, okay, maybe on the right-hand side is a minhag of Shabbos Haggadah to say the Haggadah. The problem is the minhag of saying the Haggadah and Shabbos Haggadah comes from Ashkenaz, and as far as this minhag is unknown at this time, and so that's a little bit of a doichik to say that this is the reference that's happening over here. In fact, if you look a little closer, I should point out that it looks like they're in a shul. Toward the left-hand side of the image, looks like something like an Aron Kodesh. There are fancy lights hanging, and there's a man standing on the bima, which presumably the Balabais. So it looks like what you have over here is a reading of the Haggadah in shul. Shabbat Haggadah is not an option, and then on the left-hand side is where we get the actual Seder. Well, there's a solution to this problem as well. The Ravya, Rebbe Eliezer ben Yoel Halevi, who is one of the Balei HaTosfos living in Ashkenaz, writes, Uvetshuva Yisraisi, I saw in the response of Sheyesh Oid B'Yamim Ha'elu that till today there's a minhag in Eretz Svard and in Bavel that the Shliach Tzibur is Oisa B'Pesach HaSeder B'Beis HaKnesses. They do the Seder in the Beis HaKnesses B'Pnei Amei Ha'aretz She'enim B'Kiyim Ba'Haggadah L'Omer, who are in Baki to say the Haggadah Shel Pesach. They don't know how to read. They're illiterate. And so they're going to go home. They're not going to say the Haggadah. And so therefore, what are we going to do? We're going to say it here. Now, if you read that paragraph, you may think they did the whole Seder, communal Seder. No, that's not what it means. Why? Because look how he continues. He goes, although you need to have the second cup. What's his question? If you're doing communal Seder, you have your Seder. No, you have your second cup if you're doing communal Seder. His question is, because they didn't do it. They didn't. Maybe they made Kiddush, that I don't know. But they did Haggadah, and then everyone went home, and they picked it up from the second cup, and they continued to the end of the Seder. So he says, how's a shaykh? You need to have your second cup here, and you're going to do your second cup at home. So he says that it's okay. B'doichek, b'di'avid, you do just the bracha at the end of Magid, asher ga'alonu. If you say that on your second cup, it's good and it's okay, and you're yaitza. So what do you see from here? You see that in Spain, at least in the when he's writing 1200s, there was this institution of reading out the Haggadah in shul. So if you have the reading out of the Haggadah in shul, not so upgefrekt to see a balabayis ubnei beisai in a shul reading the Haggadah, and then on the next panel you get a picture of the actually sitting at a Seder table. It's just a fascinating insight into how things are sometimes different. But on the other hand, similar. And we face similar challenges today with some of our fellow Jews, and we deal with it the way we deal with it. Yep.
Karpas, when did they have karpas?
Ich weiß. Okay, now, in order to get from shul home, you need to leave the shul. And this is one of the most famous images in the Sarajevo Haggadah. Sarajevo Haggadah is probably the most famous of all these illuminated, illustrated Haggadahs. It comes from the same period, 1300s in Spain. The reason it's the most famous is because it was the first one to surface. It surfaced in the late 1890s or the early 1900s in Germany, and so a lot of academic articles were written about it. Then during the Holocaust, it disappeared, and then it was found and discovered. So there's been a lot of stories about this particular Haggadah. And it does the same thing like all the Sephardic Haggadahs do. It goes through the stories of Bereshis, and in this case it starts from creation, and it goes through all the way till Yetzias Mitzrayim. And then on the right-hand side, you see it in smaller. I just couldn't get a bigger image that would be that would work for our purposes. The Mois Chittim images is on the right side. First, on the top, is someone distributing charoses, and on the bottom, on the right side, is someone distributing matzah, and it has those captions. Then on the left-hand side, you have the image that's blown up all the way on the left, and that's that image is, if you're able to tell, it's a family that's leaving the shul. Men, women, and children walking out of the shul. The doors to the shul are open so you could see right in, and you could see a bima. The Aron Kodesh is open. There are 3 Torahs inside with crowns on them. The Torahs are not in a tick, which is what sometimes we assume that all Sephardim always have it in those cases, which is not actually the case. It varies by time and place, but more in what the typical mantle. And Very interestingly, there is a person, can't tell 100%, but it looks more noted that it's a woman who's standing right by the Aron Kodesh, who's present over there as the family is leaving the shul. So our focus is going to be on this woman who's standing by the Aron Kodesh. If you ever had the opportunity of being in like a Moroccan shul, in France, other places, you'll see that after davening, as the men start leaving, there are women who come into the shul and go up to the bima and daven by the Aron Kodesh. And now I haven't seen it done with the Sefer Torahs being open, with the Sefer, with the Aron Kodesh being open, but we have some evidence that there was such a custom. Rebbe Vadim Bar Tanura is a name we all know because he wrote a commentary on the Mishnah, but he also traveled, and he wrote a travelogue that survives to this day, and where he comes to Palermo, how do you pronounce that, in Sicily. He writes, he was there Tishrei time. He writes that on Yom Kippur night and Hoshana Rabbah by night, after Ma'ariv, the Gaboim opened up the Heichal. So they did open the Aron Kodesh, and the women came down and they would kiss the Sifrei Torah. And again, we see this down till this day in some Sephardic communities, and that would be very interesting if that's what's being portrayed over here, that maybe there's a similar tradition on the night of Pesach, a very special night, that as families are leaving, that a woman would have the opportunity to come into the shul and to get close to the Sefer Torah in that way. Okay, now we get home. Time to come home. We are ready to make our seder, and we're gonna make kiddush. And so here we're gonna look at this Haggadah here. This is called the First Cincinnati Haggadah because it's at the Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati. And here it presents this Ashkenazim, and it presents 1400s. And we have here the spread of kiddush, and we're gonna take a look at this image that's over here. What it seems to be happening here is the preparation for kiddush, and where they're about to pour the wine. I want you to notice that white, what looks like we would call a table runner today, running over the plate. That's something that we're going to keep our eye out on for right now. Let's continue. Here you have the Ashkenazi Haggadah, which we've seen before. This is a little later. It's the Heilach Ma'anya part, but we're going to take a closer look at the people who are having the meal at the bottom. You see a chandelier or a light hanging over the tables. A lot of people stuffed around there. They're celebrating the Seder. There's a lot of interesting things on the table, but I hope you notice that table runner is running over that central plate again. Here's the Yehuda Haggadah, which I showed you before, that has those interesting images with the interesting captions. So first, just a moment about the caption here. It's Kiddush. And all the way on the right, you have someone who's in the wine cellar, and he's getting wine. He's fetching wine to bring it to the people who are sitting on the left-hand side. And so the caption says, "Minachavis yayin v'tader bekankan ayin." I love that line. That's a great line. He's bringing wine, but there's never enough in the bottle, meaning he's being sent back again and again and again. There is a halachic discussion: are you allowed to drink more wine after you make kiddush? On Pesach, me'ikar adin, you're allowed to. You can have more cups of wine between 1 and 2, though the Shulchan Aruch says that it highly recommends against it because they don't want people becoming drunk and then not being successful in reading Magid. So yeah, you can have a scene of people holding Kiddush and keep on sending their servant to go back and to bring them wine, and then on the left they're being a little agitated with their slave, which seems to be the theme in this Haggadah. Laseis hayayin ata boicher, you're choosing to carry the wine. No, he's not, but whatever. V'lama ata lahavi ma'acher, why are you delayed? It's taking. So they're getting impatient with him. Okay, but I want to call your attention to this part of the image where, remember, this is Kiddush. You see matzah there. You see a plate that looks like it has lettuce inside. And you notice that table runner, that cover, that same shape going over the matzah. And the caption reads, Ala shulchan mutalin hashalosh matzahis v'tibulin. So remember, this is Kiddush. So when we're making Kiddush, we already have the table set up with everything. Okay. Here you have a printed Haggadah in Latin. This is actually the first non-Jewish translation or translation to a non-Jewish language of a Haggadah printed, and they made woodcuts. There's interesting history behind this, but we're not going to get into it tonight. It's made in Frankfurt, early 1500s. I hope you notice, middle of the page, that same talus-looking object is sitting over the plate. What is going on over here? Why is that talus thing sitting over the plate? Okay, we're going to understand that by looking at Sephardi images, because we're going to contrast the Ashkenazi ones with the Sephardi ones. Here you have the Barcelona Haggadah. This is a Sephardi Haggadah. Here's the table of Kiddush, Vishoisin, they're drinking. I want you to notice there's nothing on the table. There's no matzah on the table. There's no kaida on the table. There's nothing. There's just wine. This is what they are doing. Once we're at this image, you might as well take a notice, another important aspect, and that is Haseba. So the artist is drawing Haseba here, but some of the people are doing it on their right. Some are doing it on their left. Haseba here is being depicted by people leaning on their hands, whether that's a kosher Haseba or not. Please consult your Orthodox rabbi, ich weiß nicht. But some are doing it on the left, which is the proper way of Haseba. Some are doing it on their right. But the main thing I want you to notice here is there's nothing on the table. Here is the sister Haggadah that I showed you before. This was next to the image of this is when the family is doing the Seder. And here, closer up at the table, there is Haggadahs. There's 2 Haggadahs. Notice not everyone has Haggadah, and this is normal before the advent of print. We don't expect every person around the table to have a Haggadah. But notice there is no kaida, there is no matzah, there is none of this that's going on at the table. And so I have 2 questions, and really one is going to answer the other. Question number 1, what's up with that covering that's hanging over the Ashkenazi table? And number 2, why is it that the Ashkenazi tables are empty by Kiddush, whereas the Sephardi tables are, why is it that the Ashkenazi tables have material on them, whereas the Sephardi tables do not? And that brings us to the Rambam versus the Maharil. The Rambam is reflecting the Minhag in Sfard. What does he say? He says, here's the Seder of how we do things on the 15th. Betchila, we're moizgin kois. V'achar we do Natil Sidayim. V'noitel yadav, there the Minhag is to make a bracha al Natil Sidayim. U'mevi'in shulchan aruch v'alav marek v'yerek. After you do your Kadesh and your Orchatz and your Karpas, then you bring the table, or no, it's really not your carpet. Then you bring the table, and you bring your maror, and you have your yard. So you're bringing all this material. So therefore, no surprise, you're looking in Rambam modeled Haggadahs, during Kiddush, you're not going to find any matzah on the table because it's something that's brought after. In fact, this really follows the tradition, the way it says it clearly in the Mishnah. However, in Ashkenaz, we have Maharil, who is the foremost Pesach we mentioned before in Ashkenaz in the 1400s, and he writes a very different Seder. You place down your matzahs on the table. You got to cover it. In other words, what's happening here is, in Sfard, you don't have a problem. Why? Because when you're making Kiddush, you don't have any of the other food on the table. Because you don't have any of the food on the table, no problem. In Ashkenaz, for whatever reason, they wanted to have everything on the table. Maybe so there's no hefsek, you go from one thing to another without any hefsek. As a result of that, you have a problem. What's the problem? Kiddush, Hagafen, shouldn't come before Chita because of the Seder of the Pasuk. Which is what we do every Shabbos. We cover our challah so that it doesn't see its shame. Right? So this is what he's writing over here. And so this is the Minhag in Ashkenaz. As a result of that, you have what we saw before. All these coverings in Ashkenaz on the matzah. And it seems that because you have so many of these table runner style coverings, it seems that the custom was to do it that specific way. In other words, the idea that it had to be a full covering wasn't so necessary. If you go all the way back over here, you'll notice, right? Notice how some of the matzah is exposed. So one has to do a little more research to figure out, was this considered okay? Like instead of it being fully covered, maybe this was considered kosher enough, at least then. Today, this is not the minhag. Today, we do a full covering, but it is interesting. Maybe this was the mode at the time to have those table runner covers. Anyway, I hear that table runners are back in style now, so maybe it's something we could all consider this Pesach as we move along. Now, one other interesting thing about this image that we've already spent time with our eyes focused on this image is that chandelier, because in his book, Rabbi Daniel Sperber, who writes about a number of these things, he points out the following Maharil. Maharil says that the chandelier that you have in your home, that you use during the year, please don't use it on Pesach. The reason is because during the year we end up putting chametz into it, and it's hot because there's a flame there. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to clean it for Pesach. So therefore, he's like, you shouldn't use it. You should replace it. But he's like, if you need to, then you got to do it in a way where you know for sure it's not going to be dripping any of its material onto the food. And if you look here at this image, you see that covering is directly right under that lamp. So it's possible that may have been another function, even after Kiddush. Remember here you're holding Hey Lachmanya. That may have been another function this covering had, was to protect from this oil lamp that seems to have been a problem at that time. Okay, let us move along in our Seder, and now we're holding Yachatz. For Yachatz we return to the Barcelona Haggadah. The Yikach, you're taking the matzah, and here you have, on the left-hand side, the man of the house about to do yachatz. Now I want you to notice, on the right-hand side, she seems to be taking the matzah already, it's like the next scene, and sticking it under the tablecloth, which is one of the dinim that you're supposed to be doing. The interesting part of this image is, the four people sitting around the table are all children. And if you look at other images in this Haggadah and others, usually there's a mixture of children and adults. It's probably not an accident. Why do we do yachatz? We do yachatz, one of the reasons, three different reasons, but one of the reasons, the middle reason as brought in the cowboy, is the children should see, and they should ask, why are we hiding the matzah when we didn't eat yet? So if that's the case, if that's the reason, it would make a lot of sense for the artist to put in this scene only children. And in fact, if you look well, you'll notice the child all the way on the right is tugging the mother's right arm, as if to say exactly what needs to be said at this point, and that is, mother, why are we breaking the matzah and putting it away? Why is this night different from any other night? So it could be that the artist is putting that into the image.
It shows interesting. The lady got the gun and the kids didn't.
She's hiding it. She's hiding it. It looks like. It looks like she's putting it away, which is what most of the Sfarim say. Yeah. Okay. Now, when it comes to the actual recital of Halachah and Minhag, this Barcelona Haggadah has a very interesting image. Here's the text, and here's this huge piece of art, and you'll notice that a basket is on this child's head. And there is a makar for this. There is a makar from this time. It actually was just printed recently in the last 20 years, a sefer that was written during the 1300s in Spain, called Pesach Doiris, where he writes that Minik Svard is lag bia kaira biyadoi va'omer helach ma'anya v'nag hu lahakif saviv roish haktanim, that we put this over the head of the children. Presumably, this was about, again, stimulating their curiosity so that they ask what's going on over here, which leads into the Manashtana. There may be other reasons as well. And I did see that there's still today, there are Sephardim that do have this minhag, but this would be the earliest attestation to that. Okay, now we get into Magid. And we're saying the story. And we want to do a real good job at saying the story. And this brings us to one of the most interesting and famous pictures that, again, brings us back to the Sarajevo Haggadah. Here is just a Seder scene. There's a family sitting around the table. And there's stuff on the table, there's eating and drinking. But people have noticed that there's something odd about the person in the foreground, at the front of the picture, on the left-hand side. Why is that? Because that person is treated differently from everyone else. First of all, everyone's on one side of the table, and she is on the other side, number one. Number two, everyone is wearing, an orange dress or something. She's wearing yellow. It's very different from the other ones. Number three, she's considerably lower than the other people. Number four, her skin is much darker than the other people, and her facial features are also significantly different from others as well. And so for a long time already, people have said, oh, well, it looks like we're dealing here with a migrant from Africa who's sitting at the Seder table, which then led to the thing, well, what is a migrant from Africa doing at the Seder table? A lot has been written about this, by the way. So some have wanted to say, converted to Yiddishkeit, and so she's at shul, and she's like a ger, and so she doesn't have anywhere to go, and so this family is bringing her in. Okay, it's possible. Some have said that this it may be the slave. This may be the slave. We know from other Haggadahs that the slaves feature prominently in these Haggadahs. You have to remember, these Haggadahs are being written. If you're having imagery in your Haggadah, it means you're a millionaire. Much more than that, probably. You're a wealthy person if you're able in the Middle Ages to commission a manuscript like this, which means you also have slaves, which means you would expect to see slaves in your Haggadah that's supposed to mirror your life. So if it's a slave, then the conversation becomes like this. Look how, you've seen this, you go online, you can look at it. Look how inclusive the Jews are, that when they're celebrating their holiday, they bring their slave to celebrate with them. And that also may be true. But it's also possible that there's something else that's going on over here. The Rambam says in Ochos Chametz U'Matzah like this: Lefit Haitei Shel Ben Aviv Malamdo. We need to teach in accordance with the understanding of the child. Ketzad. What does this mean? Im haya katan oy tipish, a young child, or an unintelligent one. Omerlei, B'ni, my son, kulanu ayinu avadim. We were all slaves. Kamoy shivcha zu oy kamoy eved zeh. Just like this maidservant and this slave b'Mitzrayim. Notice how Rambam jumped to the second person. What is that? this person. Shivchazu, he's talking about someone right here, right? He's not, right? He's talking as if there's someone sitting right here at the table. It is definitely possible that that's what's happening here in this image, that a slave is being brought to the table, because when you're saying the story of Magid and you're saying we have been liberated, you're trying to say unlike the person that the Rambam is talking about. So do I know that it's specifically that? No, no one knows. But for us to marry any one particular theory here, anyway, so we don't know. But definitely a possibility to consider. And but what it does tell us is about the story, where making it real for the child is what's being expressed possibly on that page.
What's she holding in her hand?
Good question. It looks like she's holding a cup. She's not holding a cup. The cup is right behind her. She's holding a shtickle matzah. They say she's holding a little matzah. Okay, let's move along. Now we come to, we eat the matzah. We spoke about the matzah before, and now we come to the time of eating mar. Okay, so really this is earlier in the Haggadah where we're talking about mar before we eating it. Mar is Eshan Oichlim, and here this Haggadah is called the Rylands Haggadah. This comes from Spain, also 1300s. Today it's in Manchester, in the library there. And there's this image. Now, when people looked at this image, they started getting nervous. Why? Because they decided it doesn't really look like a head of lettuce. In fact, some have said that it looks like an artichoke. And then you start looking at other Haggadahs. You see here is Brother Haggadah, very similar. It's called the Brothers Haggadah in British Library in London. And it looks awfully similar in that respect. And then here is a Sarajevo Haggadah. Looks a little different, but also it looks a little bit like a artichoke. Okay, there are some people who have therefore written, and it does say that in Spain the minhag was to eat an artichoke for mar. The problem is that there are no written sources that suggest that artichoke is a valid version of mar. The Mishnah says that there are 5 versions of mar. The first one is chazeres, and then there are 4 other options. And there is a wide-ranging discussion about how to identify what each one of those options are. There's almost nothing to suggest an artichoke. There is that one of the 5, the Aruch says means something. The Aruch is one person living in Italy, and some people think that one thing the Aruch said may be an artichoke. So there isn't a lot to back it up, and we know from other places about lettuce. So you end up having a machloika. Some people think, and you'll see in books, that in Spain the minhag was to have an artichoke. And some people think, don't take this image too seriously. Whatever, they told the artist, give me something green, and it was something green, and it was close enough. And again, you can choose whichever one you want. Our minhag in terms of eating the chazeres and the chrein is something that we know. Okay, now we reach a trigger warning part of the conversation. Here you're looking at, once we're talking about mar, you're looking at the Prague Haggadah. I showed this to you last week from 1526. This is the first full Haggadah in Hebrew that has many different woodcuts and interesting insights that are given along the way. And when you have the passage that says mar ezesh anu oichlim, you have the following image. There's a man at the bottom holding leaves, looks like lettuce, with a finger pointing. And let's read the quote that it says on top of this. Yesh minhag ba'olam, there is a universal custom, or there is a custom in the world, sheha'ish moira al ha'isha, that the man points to the woman. Mishum shenemar, because the pasuk says, isha ra'a mar mimavas, that a bad wife is worse than death. So the Prague Haggadah is telling us that there is a custom to point at a woman by marar, because isha ra'a mar, more bitter, marar from mothers. Okay. Some people look at this and say, what is he talking about? There are no Sfarim that reference this minhag. None of the Sfarim in Ashkenaz or anything that reference that minhag. However, doesn't mean that he's coming out of nowhere. Because if you go back to the manuscripts, you find images that when you look at, that make you wonder. Mar ezesh anu oichlim, and here you have a picture of a man and woman, and he's touching her. This is in Munich, this thing, also from the 1400s. It's a fascinating story about this Haggadah. It's actually called the Monk's Haggadah. If you're interested, check it out. Not for our purposes today. The Library of Congress has Haggadah called the Washington Haggadah. Comes from the 1400s in Germany. Mar ezesh anu oichlim. There's a man almost looks like he's feeding her, or the mar touching her head, and she's holding a sword. She's holding a sword.
He's going like together, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So now we need to stop here and we need to say. So this is not an accident anymore. This is not an accident anymore. It is not probable. Here are the options. To say that this is just something that was being drawn that doesn't reflect any sort of reality, I don't think so. That's not likely. So it is reflecting a reality. The question is, what type of reality? Is it a reality that in rabbinic circles there is an endorsement for a custom to joke about, make a marriage joke at Maror? I don't think so, because there's no evidence of any of that from the rabbinic writings that we have in this period, and it generally goes against what I think Rabbanim try to teach and try to have. But is it possible that in the general culture, or as the Prague guy said, minig ba'olam, is it possible that in olam, Lashon Helem, you had Jews doing this? I think the answer is yes, it is possible. Were they joking, or were they serious? So that's something that is is a little hard to figure out. I'd hope that they were joking. It's just a bad joke, but I would hope that they were joking about it. Let's continue. Here you have a Haggadah in Paris, in the National Library in Paris, and this is called, sometimes it's called the Hilik and Bilik Haggadah. Okay, here you have a woman who stands up for herself. You get captions here. There are captions here. The man's caption says, Marar zeh koili b'harem. When I'm going to say Marar zeh, shanu oichem al shuma, so when I raise my voice and say Marar zeh, bezeh v'zeh goydem. Both of you are causing my bitterness, the Marar and you. But she's pointing back, and it says, Chuvas isha, haloicha shavticha ke'echad mehem. I considered you one of them, meaning a cause of my bitterness or something like that. V'yavai hashlishi, so we're having this debate. So let the third one come, and it should be v'yachriya beineim, and figure out who's right or who's wrong, right? But it's v'yasriach beineim, and make a stink among them. So a lot of people try to say they know what that means. I'm safer saying I don't exactly know what the intention is there. But clearly here you have a woman who's standing up for herself. Okay, where is all this coming from? Everything has a shayrish in Kedusha. What's the shayrish in Kedusha? There are psukim. The Gemara in Bracha says that when Eretz Yisrael, when a man would marry a woman, they would ask him the following question: Matzah or moitza? Matzah or moitza? What type of question is that? Well, the Gemara explains. Matzah is tiksiv matzah isha matzah tov. You found a woman, you found goodness. Moitza, what is that? Tiksiv moitza ani mar mimav esesa isha. I find more bitter than death, a woman, and that's in Koheles. So what's going on? At a wedding, they're saying, what type of wife are you marrying? Are you marrying a wife that is matzah, good wife, or maitzah, that is bad wife? Now, many of the Mefarshim are asked a very simple question. What type of question is that for a wedding? Why are you asking a guy at the wedding what type of wife? First of all, does he know? It's too late. And it's kind of a little late, right? So what type of question is this? And how is that helpful? How is this helpful? So there have been those in the last 100 years, a few different svarim that have given an interesting interpretation to this pasuk. What's the difference between matzah and moitzeh? Matzah is lashon avar. It's in the past. It's in the past. Matzah isha matzah toiv. It's in the past. What does that mean? The searching has concluded. The searching is over. I'm not looking anymore. Moitzeh is I am finding. So these are two different positions of a man. There's one type of man who's always searching. Yes, he's married, but he's still searching for what's next, what's better, or even within his spouse. I think you could be better like this way. He's constantly searching. That's moitzeh. Matzah is, I found my spouse. It's done. I'm in. I'm committed. I'm no longer looking anymore. That's one difference between these two psukim. The other is, in the first pasuk, it's matzah isha. I found someone else. I made space for someone else. The second pasuk, moitzeh, is umoitzeh ani. I find myself. In other words, there isn't really space for another person. There's only space for me. So when I am constantly looking and it's all about me, then your wife will be more bitter than death. When you finished your search and you're looking to open up to another person and to have a relationship with someone else and to make space for someone else, then you will have found goodness. And so now let's come back. There's matzah and morer. Matzah is matzah. This is my chiddush. I didn't see that. Matzah, that's matzah. So matzah is the first pasuk, right? Maror is the second pasuk. So when you're eating matzah this year, you think, what's your relationship with your spouse? Are you committed? And are you making space for another person? That's matzah, that's bittul, that's beauty. If, however, you're constantly you're looking for better, and there is no space for another person, then your relationship is one of maror, absolutely, and maybe that's a lesson that we could take from these images. Menachem, does that satisfy you? Okay, now just one interesting thing. We're so much on the Yehuda Haggadah that I showed you before. It so happens to be that they have like biblical scenes running throughout the Haggadah. It so happens to be the maror scene is the shiras of the women. So maybe, don't know, but maybe this is a subtle like, no. Maror, you're going to put, no. We're going to put, instead of using that page to degrade women, even in a way that's just a joke, we're going to put one of the highlights that betray that convey the tzitkus and the uniqueness of Jewish women. Just a thought that crossed my mind as I was looking at the material. Okay.
Because Miriam was a Miriam.
Oh, that's a good vart. I didn't think of that. Miriam, Maror, and yes, it says her name all the way on the left. She's carrying a large instrument, and the caption on the top, Befedish says her name. So that's a very good ha'ara, Yossi, that the connection between Miriam and Maror. I did not think of that. Yosha Koyach. Yes, very good. Okay, now we start winding down our Seder. We're at the area of Shvoi Chamascha. Let's talk about this for a few minutes. We know that we have a custom to open up the door for Elio and to pour, let me say that again. There's a custom to open up the door toward the end of the Seder, minhag number 1, and minhag number 2 to pour koshel Elio. And I want you to understand the background of these halachas, and then we'll show how it's depicted. Go back to the Urzerur, Rabbi Yitzchak of Vienna, who's writing in the 1200s. He brings a tradition for Rav Nissen Goin, who was lived in North Africa in the 900s, who had said in the name of his father Rav Yaakov, we don't lock our doors on Pesach. Why? Different for the reason you heard of. This is our faith in God's promise, and in this faith, we're Zeichen Legula. That's a vague statement. What does that mean? You leave it open because of your faith in the Gula, but then he brings the Yerushalmi. And the Yerushalmi is that when Rabbi Yirmiyah was buried, he said, I want you to bury me with my shoes, my stick in my hand, lay me on my side. When Mashiach comes, I want to be ready. What does that have to do with this? Because that is why we're leaving our doors open. Today it takes a second to open your door, right? But go back to medieval locks, maybe it took 4 seconds, maybe it took a little longer. But no matter how long it took, Mashiach comes, I want to be there in a second. I don't want anything delaying. I'm leaving my door open. Why? I'm expecting his coming tonight. If I'm expecting his coming, I don't want any extra second delay. This is the source of the minhag, the original, the earliest source about not locking the door on the night of Pesach. Comes along the Ramah and quotes from Marie Bruna. Marie Bruna was a Rav in Germany in the 1400s, and he says, takes it to the next level. He says like this: if we're not locking it, we might as well, we're Jews. What do Jews do? We make a ceremony out of everything. We're going to make a ceremony about not locking the door. What does a ceremony about not locking the door look like? You go over to the door, and you open it up, and then when you close it, you don't lock the door, right? So that's turning it into a ceremony. So this is Marie Bruna in the 1400s says, when do we do this? By Shvoi Chamascha. Why? Shvoi Chamascha is when God is going to take it out on the nations. When is that going to happen? When Mashiach comes. So Shvoi Chamascha is all about Mashiach. So because we're talking about Mashiach, this is the right time to show that we believe so much in you that we're not going to lock our doors. So we do the ceremony of opening our door. This is what Marie Bruna says over here. Okay. So this is why we're opening the door by Shvoi Chamascha. Now, comes along Rabbi Yosef Yusbahan, who tells us about a minhag that existed in the 1500s in Frankfurt. He writes the Minhagim of Frankfurt. He says that it's a wonderful, beautiful minhag, Zecher LaMoshiach, that one of the people at the Seder slips out. And then when you open the door for Shvoi Chamascha, he jumps in. And he goes, hello, hi. What's the idea? It's in order to bring it home, to make it concrete. The idea that Pisam Yava, you could walk in, the Mashiach Kamamish come here. It's Kedei Laharos Beleo Geula Seinu Arishayna. On the night of our first Geula from Mitzrayim, Amunaseinu Achazaka Al Geula Seinu Achreina, our strong belief in the latter Geula. So what do you see here? You see a transition that really makes this concrete, really makes it real. The night of the Seder is a time to really visualize that it's happening right now. So much so we're doing these physical, the ceremony, and we're even in some cases having a guy popping in from the door. Okay, with that background, let's look at some of the Haggadahs. Because what you have is, you have imagery, due to time, I'm just going to jump forward to this image here. You have in the Washington Haggadah I showed you before, it's here in the Library of Congress, from Ashkenaz, from the 1400s, you have at Shvoi Chamascha, you have a person opening the door. He's opening the door. And what's here? There's a man riding on a donkey, presumably Mashiach, with people with him. One of the people is holding a cup. And the idea is, the person who's going to be experiencing the Seder should visualize this, right? This is not a surprise. You visualize this. That's why we're opening the door, in a sense, with the expectation that this should be happening now. So no surprise to see. And you have this on a lot. This is one of the best ones. You have many of these images of the opening of the door with the expectation that it could happen right now. It could be right now. This is, again, but it all starts out, it's the ceremony of having the door not locked so that I could quickly get out when he finally comes. Now notice, the guy opening the door is holding a cup. He's holding a cup. So this tells us that the cup is really connected with what's going on over here. Now what am I being shoyl? There's three basic explanations for Koshel Elio. Some people say, because there's a shitta that maybe you need a fifth cup. Maybe you don't need a fifth cup. It's a suffix. So when Elio comes, he's going to tell us. Okay, then that cup doesn't belong here. Some people say it's called Koshel Elio because Elio comes to every Seder to attest that the Yidden are remaining loyal to God, just like he comes to every bris. Okay, fine. Maybe you could say that that's some explanation here. But the earliest source that really talks about Koshel Elio is just surfaced a few years ago, comes from Zelig Binga, and it was just printed, but he's writing in the 1400s. And he writes, I saw people who are doing Koshel Elio. I don't know the reason. Vinira, but I'm going to make one up. How's he going to make one up? Because he's living in a climate and in a culture that has a certain understanding of what things are. So it makes a lot of sense. If he shows up, he's going to need a cup. Because you need to have four. If you're not going to prepare, then it's not going to be good. So we're worried that Elio Hanavi is going to come to announce Mashiach. He's not going to have a kais for the night of Pesach. So therefore, that's what's happening over here. You have all of the elements coming together. There's the opening of the door, which includes the not locking of the door, which includes coming with the cup, which includes the Elio Hanavi there. All about this idea, this belief, which we're supposed to experience on the night of Pesach in a sincere way, that is going to happen. It could happen tonight. The month of Nisan is a very special time for it, and we're already in that month. Okay, now the Seder is winding down. And we processed all this information, and we did matzah, and we did haseba, and we did kaddish, and orchatz, and karpas, and yachatz, and magid, and all these wonderful things. So how are we feeling right now? We're very tired. We're very tired. What do we want to do?
Sleep.
We want to go to sleep. Okay. So here's the last page in the Haggadah. It's called the Flor Sham Haggadah. It's this midas that at the end of the Ashkenazi Haggadah, Kiloi Noah, and you have the ending, the winding down of the Seder. And what's on their minds? That's when they're getting gut schlafen, and you have an image over there of a nice, comfortable, and cozy bed to which each of us is gonna go as well at the end of the Seder, so that we can wake up the next day and start our next Seder and do it all over again, better than the previous night. But anyway, so this is a small taste of the types of things that you can get by going through these images, learning in some ways the things that are exactly the same as today. But those are less interesting, and so many of those things I wasn't showing because they are. But then some of the things that are a little different, and why they're different, or how these things develop, and hopefully this empowers us to kind of appreciate the types of minhagim and halachas that we're going to be observing as we observe the Yom Tov of Pesach. And remember, matzah, okay, not moitzah, okay.